Hi, everyone. I'm Erik Brynjolfsson, and welcome to the Stanford Digital Economy Lab lunch seminar series. We're very lucky today to have Sanjay Sarma and Bill Bonvillian from MIT, when they're going to be talking about workforce education, a new roadmap. Sanjay is the Vice President for Open Learning at MIT, which includes the Office of Digital Learning, the MIT Integrated Learning Initiative, and the Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab. He's also the Fred Ford Flowers and Daniel Flowers Professor of Mechanical Engineering. He was the founder of the Auto ID Center at MIT and developed many of the key technologies behind the RFID standards that are now used worldwide. Bill Bonvillian is also at MIT. He's a lecturer there in science, technology, and society and the political science departments. He's a senior director of special projects in the Office of Digital Learning. And together, they've been working on this project on workforce education, a new roadmap. So welcome to Sanjay and Bill. I want to tell the participants that we encourage you to ask questions. The way to do that is if you at the bottom of Zoom there, you see a little button that says Q&A. So just click on that and you can enter your questions in the Q&A. And we will save some time. I'm hoping Sanjay and Bill will save about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for general discussion. If there's a clarifying question during their presentations, I may interrupt them with that just to make sure we all are understanding what they're saying well. But with that, let me turn it over to Sanjay and Bill. Welcome very much.
Thanks very much, Erik. I'm going to share my slides here. Do you see them?
Yes.
Right. So it's such a pleasure to do this presentation with all of you and to see Erik again and to see, frankly, anyone again after a year of pandemic. Bill and I have been busy over the last few years on a couple of independent threads that have come together for this book. So I am the Vice President for Open Learning at MIT. I sit on the board of edX. MIT has produced a whole lot of new content for the online world, the MicroMasters, professional education, boot camps, and of course, MOOCs. Massive open online courses. Separately, 2018, I approached Bill and said, we need to start looking at what the needs of the workforce are, because we're finding that more and more of our learners are median age 27 or older. And so obviously there's a workforce need. And so he and I, with the funding from the Schmidt Futures Foundation, looked at the overall education system in the workforce, its strengths, weaknesses, and new models. And we wrote a final report, and then we turned that into a book, which is the book you see to the right of the screen. I'm going to go really fast here and just say that I'll use a test Bill uses. You know, if you ask a typical American, what is high school education? They know what it is. Elementary education, they know what it is. Higher ed, tertiary education, they know what it is. What is workforce education in America? Very few people know what that is. But if you ask the same question in Germany or in Switzerland, there is an answer. And in America, it's extremely scattered. And the reason is that it's never been a priority, and it could never. And today, post-COVID, it's becoming even more of a priority because of the incredibly stark consequences of inequality post-COVID. And the poor and working class have been much more, I would say, devastated by this. And unemployment numbers are high, in excess of 10 million, but it's a labor non-participation rate that is sort of staggering. And many sectors, we know them, face severe damage, but also really headwinds in coming back to anything resembling normalcy. Before COVID, it was thought that the middle class would be hurt the most, and the people with higher income wage group, higher wage income groups, and the lower income groups would be fine. But what we're finding, and there's a nice McKinsey report on this, just very recent, is that even in lower income groups, the damage is going to be pretty significant. And it's the higher income groups that have the greatest upside. This is not that dissimilar, frankly, to World War II, right? I mean, after World War II, 16 million soldiers and sailors came home, not just to America, actually to Canada, every country. My grandfather came back to India to a similar thing, and he became a doctor because of something similar. And in the US, of course, it's the GI Bill. And we have similar opportunity with similar numbers. And the question is, will we mount a similar response? So, and what are the options? Frankly, hey, guess what? Online education is around. It's growing. We've spent a year training to do this. The numbers are staggering. This graph on the right from IEEE Spectrum shows how as the regular delivery plummeted in April, how online took off. At one point, there were 1.6 billion students worldwide, hanging by a thread. Society, humanity hanging by a thread. I like to joke that it's gallows humor that the 21st century begins in 2021. It did not begin in 2000 and 2001.
Yeah, it's very strange. The chart's a little hard to read, but just for those who may not see it, the blue falling line is regular delivery that goes from 100% down to close to 0%, and the yellow rising line is fully online that goes exactly mirrors that.
Yeah, so we've spent as humanity a year training in a digital transformation. So I seriously argue that the 21st century began this year because we're entering a new reality with humanity retrained. And if we take on workforce education, online is right there, and we have a need for a new workforce education system. So what I'm going to spend is, I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about the science of learning. I'm going to go a little bit slower, and then I'm going to leave the last 10, 15 minutes for Bill to go through the workforce education side, because the two go hand in hand. So let's start with the science of learning, first of all. The way we teach today isn't something that somehow, we learn from science. It's a happenstance. The way schools are run today, the way we run them is based on effectively models that emerged during the Industrial Revolution in Europe and America. And some people say it's factory education. There's some truth to that. But actually, the more important analogy is that we had to find ways to keep the kids occupied, while parents were working. And of course, the factory model sort of went there. And one aspect of the factory model is testing. You have to test people, just as you test products. So testing became very central. And our education system is based entirely on testing today. Now, the problem is that since then, Dewey and Thorndike and a whole bunch of other people, we've learned a lot more about the brain. We know how the brain incorporates new knowledge. We know about the prefrontal cortex, whether that red region is the CEO of the brain. We know how memories are formed through the parahippocampal cortex and so on. And we know empathy, insight, morality, intuition, all the stuff. And a lot of it has emerged because of breakthroughs in things like functional MRI. And, just the history of that is interesting in and of itself. So Marcy first discovered that blood flow could indicate brain activity. It's sort of like, in a computer, if the graphics chip is being used more, it heats up. So similarly in the brain, the region of the brain that's occupied the most or processing the most needs the most oxygen. So what it comes down to is, can we somehow figure out which brain activity, which part of the brain is active when? So through fMRI, and I wouldn't read everything out to you, but through a series of contributions like from Pauling and Coriel and Seiji Ogawa and Bellevue and Kwong, we figured out just by sticking someone in MRI and have them play music or read which part of the brain does what. And we've made some incredible breakthroughs in the science of learning, much of it actually at MIT in the lab of John Gabrielli in the McGovern Center, etc. And what do these learnings tell us? So I'm going to spend now a few minutes telling you what they tell us. It's actually quite fascinating. We're learning, for example, that the average student, when you're absorbing new knowledge, you can only sort of stick to the task for about 10 or 15 minutes, really. And the reason for that is, after about 10 or 15 minutes, let me build this out, and we can see that through fMRI, after about 10 or 15 minutes of absorbing information, the brain actually enters a state of mind, which literally, and I'm not making this up, it's called mind wandering, right? And mind wandering is when the brain's trying to connect the dots and so on. And yet every lecture, every classroom is what, 70 minutes, 90 minutes, 50 minutes, 90 minutes, right? Completely violating this principle. It makes sense because it takes 10 minutes to settle a class down. You can't do a 10-minute lecture. It's just inconvenient. And so that's just one thing. And we have so many other lessons from the brain. Now, this may all seem extremely clinical and scientific and perhaps even not so human, but actually, when I distill all these lessons, they remind me that actually these lessons add up to something surprisingly human. In fact, they remind me of my experiences as a parent or my experiences as a child, because parenting and childhood are, teaching and learning sort of built into our evolutionary, built out of evolutionary demands. The human child is the most immature of all mammalian children when born, right? But it also makes us very adaptable. And it's through learning that we get there. So in fact, a lot of the things I'm going to describe to you now, and I won't go through this laundry list here, I'll just give you a few examples, are surprisingly reminiscent of what I know from, from my daughter's education. You know that after about 10 minutes, 10 minutes of lecturing, her eyes would roll over, right? A glaze. And she would, and then, I'd catch her attention later when she was interested and curious. And we're learning all this. We know, for example, now that curiosity is the equivalent in the brain of hunger, and dopamine is the equivalent of saliva. These are all, in fact, there's a circuit called the dopaminergic circuit in learning that you need to activate, and the importance of curiosity is central. So here's a fascinating thing. You can just, I picked a few lessons to sort of go through with you, and I'll do it quickly. And this is a complicated graph, and it's got that bearded gent in the picture, but let me explain what it is. Here's the lesson. You need to forget to learn. Very strange, isn't it? So the graph is complicated, but just follow the orange line. You learn something the first time, you'll forget it very fast. The brain is incented to forget. You learn it the second time, you'll forget it less fast, more slowly. Third time, more slowly. And eventually, you'll never forget it. That was discovered by that gentleman, Ebbinghaus, 120 years ago. And it's called spaced retrieval. It's used in Duolingo and Babbel and a bunch of other language programs, but most professors, most teachers have never heard of it, right? How strange is that? And yet in every classroom, if a student doesn't pay attention, we say you're not paying attention, although they've exceeded 10 minutes. If a student forgets, it's seen as the ultimate sin. In fact, the fundamental fallacy in our education system is that the student's brain is a sheet of paper and the professor holds a pen. And all the professors do is write on a sheet of paper and declare victory. But what you see from following people like Ebbinghaus is, in fact, that's not natural. And as I said, every parent knows this. You don't chide, your child for forgetting. If you take a number of these effects and put them in a different form, this is a great graph I found by by Clark Quinn. Red is how we teach. Red, if you cram, and this vertical black bar is the exam day. If you cram, you might actually do better at the exam. But you're going to forget really fast. If you learn slowly with spaced retrieval, spacing, you will remember much better. And our entire edifice of education is based on that word I used earlier, testing. And so actually we encourage testing, we encourage cramming, and for that line, because you actually do better. It's like, a hamburger eating contest, really. And you know what happens the next day. So this is a fundamental fallacy in the way we educate today. And, the things go on and on. Here's another very subtle one. It's called interleaving. So let's say that, this is shown up in art and it's shown up in sports, everything I've told you, it shows up in learning math. So the paper by Taylor and Rohrer is very interesting. I think they have students calculate the surface areas of spheres versus the surface areas of cones. And here's what they show. You're better off teaching in the following sequence: cone, sphere, cone, sphere, cone, sphere, as opposed to cone, 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 sphere, sphere, sphere. Yet every chapter in every book is organized: cones, the chapter on cones, the chapter on spheres. So anyway, all these lessons, if you look at them, it turns out they're actually, here's another one.
So Sanjay, that's a very interesting point. If I could just ask a little bit about that.
Please.
Is the alternating, is that a function of putting more space between when you learn cones? Or is it that there's some kind of transfer learning, like we talk about in team learning, that carries over from one to the other?
Actually, it's not so much transfer learning, but it's we detect the differences. And there's actually the two aspects to it. One, when you say, let's say you're learning art, right? Seurat versus Monet. You see Seurat, you see Monet, the difference stands out more. But if you get into the groove of Seurat, you're actually not focusing on the differences.
Hey, Seurat, as they say.
Okay, Seurat, exactly. And the other one is we learn in the loading of the program, not the actual application of the program. It's almost like you want to erase the program and upload it again, the Seurat program and then the Monet program. In golf, for example, you're better off hitting a driver and then, a putt and then a driver and a putt, rather than driver, putt, putt, putt. So this also shows up in sports. It's sort of related to interval training as well, actually, strangely enough. So yeah, it's fascinating. precisely why that works. And by the way, the space learning thing I mentioned to you, it has been shown up and down this the stack of evolution. We can recreate it in C. elegans, the worm, and in fruit flies, which I understand is not the target market for either Stanford or MIT, but that's how fundamental it is. And this is another little lesson. It turns out that curiosity triggers dopamine, and curiosity makes a huge difference. You make people curious, they will just absorb the knowledge. And you know this if you're a parent again. You know spacing if you're a parent, you know interleaving if you're a parent, you mix it up a little bit to make things fun as well. And you know this, lesson after lesson. So here's what happened. So I actually wrote a book about it, came out last year. It's called The Science Transforming How We Learn. Grasp.
Question before you move on to that. In the Q&A, someone asked, what's the duration, or Pawan Nand Kishore asked, what's the duration between space learning? So that graph, I wasn't sure I saw the x-axis.
Yeah, the thing to do, if you want to do it ideally, you want to detect whether the person's getting rusty and remind them. But if you want a rule of thumb, I'd say space 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, something like that. But the way we space today is not at all, right?
Well, we'll have you back in 1 day.
By the way, let me apply another trick to you. Does anyone remember the name of the organ that helps with memory formation? That's called retrieval learning, because I'm forcing you to search your short-term memory. So if you have it, please post it if you remember. So the way we teach today is as follows, right? So these are all the things we ought to be doing: lectures, retrieval effects, spaced repetition, interleaving, and a whole bunch of other things: curiosity, coaching, hands-on learning, faded examples. By the way, hands-on learning is very cool. When you do something with your hands or you apply it, the motor cortex gets engaged. You learn it better. It's called embodied cognition. So today, our education works today. This as follows. We waste all the classrooms on lectures, right? And the rest of it, we sort of don't do. What online does, and by the way, in COVID, it's the worst of both worlds, because when you do lectures, you're doing socially distanced learning to begin with, I would argue. And we just put it on Zoom, all right? And so now parents and everyone can see how bad it is. Of course, it's a mess. Good online is not that. Good online is this.
Transcription, translation, universal genetic code, ribosomes, all very similar.
So Erik will remember this gentleman. It is Erik Lander, another Erik, who's now in the White House helping President Biden. He is one of the people who sequenced the human genome, led the team, one of the teams, 2 teams. He's a professor at MIT and Harvard. This is our biology course. You have Erik Lander in an asynchronous pre-recorded video, which you can pause and rewind in 10-minute chunks, giving a wonderfully poetic description, memorable description of the fundamental dogma in biology of what human life is. The name of the course is, Secret to Life, right? That is beautiful online video, not the thing about Zoom. Now, what's happened is when you do it this way, and when you do things online, you can do all the tricks that I described, because online videos, online lectures are better at doing the things that I described. So the future is you don't do lectures in person, you do them online. And all the things that I said we can do really well in person, do them online. That's what the MOOCs do. But all the things we ought to be doing in the classroom, and thank heavens, Erik and I have a job, we will continue to have a job, because things like this discussion, Q&A, coaching, context, do that in the classroom. So what I've just described to you in a multidimensional way is what is coarsely referred to as the flipped classroom. This is flipped learning in a multidimensional way. The classroom focuses on context, curiosity, coaching, things like that. By the way, there's a beautiful book on coaching by Anders Ericsson, who passed away last year, a brilliant man, called Peak. I think it's called Peak, the Science of Expertise. I recommend it. So this is online education, and this is the power of online education. When nature gives us the privilege of being together again, and we're back together, we need to reclaim it with hands and feet, grab it with our teeth, and make it count. If we go back to the classroom and do what we were doing on Zoom again, and the only thing missing is the Zoom windows, it might actually be worse, because people actually like Zoom. You can do chat. You can't even do that in the classroom. So where does all this lead? Where this leads is and I'd like to make a sort of a passionate case for this before I hand off to Bill to talk about workforce education now writ large, is that we have an incredible opportunity as a country, as a people, as humanity. The 21st century, which Happy New Year, Happy New Century just began this year in my view, has forced us all to confront the possibilities with online education. And it's becoming widespread. And guess what, folks? Although online education, I've been involved with MOOCs and other things like that for 10, 20 years. I was involved in the creation of open courseware at MIT. But it's crept up on us. And as I said, we suddenly found ourselves depending on it, hanging by a string, which is all things technical. But now a whole bunch of other things are going to kick in. So I want to talk a little bit about virtual reality and augmented reality in learning. A lot of people might think, oh my God, virtual reality, augmented reality, those are, futuristic. They won't happen for years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Yes, the new iPhone has, time of flight cameras built in and, we can do some AR, but how will you do education? Well, guess what? You'll be surprised to know we've been doing augmented reality, and Bill and I have written and talked about it for 80 years, 90 years. Did you know that during World War II, a German general, and actually Japanese, remarked that the Germans, the Americans, the Allies, especially the Americans, the Germans, the Americans, and the Japanese could all produce planes, but only the Americans could produce pilots economically and at scale. And the reason for that is because of an augmented reality technology that's existed for 80 years. And that is the flight simulator. A company called the Link Company produced flight simulators, and our aviation industry is solvent today to some extent, although it may not be solvent after the 21st century. It's possible to train people on the ground quite a bit before they go into the air, and that's the flipped classroom. And in the air, Sully learns to be Sully, so that when something bad happens, he can do the magic required to save lives. So augmented reality and virtual reality are old, but my God, we're going to get there now. Now some amazing things are going to happen. Computer gaming and simulation. This is something, again, that it's been around for some time, right? But the possibilities with technology in learning are quite amazing. Simulation, of course, flight simulators and other things. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. And COVID has accelerated the funding and the possibilities. AI-based education, I think, is another incredible opportunity. I've always been skeptical of it. The early work happened at CMU on cognitive tutors. But I think that if you look at what's happening with GPT-3, I was playing with it a few days ago, it's pretty staggering. GPT, for those of you who don't know, is a natural language processing, that, and BERT. GPT is generative pre-trained, whatever, right? I mean, it's basically a language. And what you can do now with GPT-3 and technology in terms of having an AI bot coach a student in basic stuff is pretty incredible. And that will lead to a whole bunch of other stuff in digital tutors. Micro-credentials are going to take off. They're already taking off. We invented something called the Micro Masters. We're also now at MIT and Harvard and about 12 other schools have set up blockchain-based certifications so that students can get micro-credentials, not degrees, and put them on their LinkedIn page, say, and an employer can click on it and it'll confirm that the person really received it. Our traditional approach is employers call the registrar's office and say, hey, did John Smith get this degree? And the registrar returns the call. But the future is that this won't happen. Bill, did you have a question? I see your hand raised. Oh, okay. And then finally, boot camps. Boot camps are these distilled in-person sort of events. So with that, so this is all in the offing. And I think we're in a very interesting stage where a combination of online education and in-person distilled, where you need it, but done right, education can transform learning. So Bill, I think the next slide is, I'll just say one more thing. I'll say this. I think that the social contract of universities is going to change. So if you look at this graph here, what you see is what universities, so think of it as, universities, what can we do? And what's our contract with society? some things will be rather bad at, but some will be good at. For example, organizing a delivery framework. That's why we created edX, which is open source. Stanford uses it, right? Online platforms. Can MIT teach welding? I don't know. Could Stanford teach paralegal something or the other? No, not really. Stanford is an incredible law school. They won't do paralegal. Maybe other schools will fill that in. So we need to figure out what we're good at and partner with other schools so they can interdigitate and deliver a 6-on-6 on everything that needs to be done. So this is, I think, a call to action as well for universities. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Bill. Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Sanjay. So Sanjay's laid out the great learning science challenge that we've got ahead and this new opportunity space for teaching and learning. And that carries right over to workforce education, right? All the lessons that Sanjay is talking about in the science of learning can go right into improving workforce education. And the coronavirus tells us we're going to have a big problem of scale, right? We're going to need to reach many more people. It's going to be a big challenge because the existing, quote, system, and it's not really a system, there's a real disconnect between work and learning. There's disinvestment in workforce education by government and employers over an extended period of time. The programs in our labor department don't reach higher technical skills or incumbent workers. The programs in the education department aren't connected to those in the labor department, and they focus on college, not workforce needs. They aren't linked to the labor department programs. We dismantled much of vocational education in the US. We've got underfunded community colleges. We've got colleges and universities, and Sanjay was just talking about this, disconnected from workforce education. We're going to need them. Lifelong learning is really not in the system at the moment. We've got underfunded advanced technical education programs that are at NSF and the Advanced Manufacturing Institutes, but they are small. We've got a broken labor market information system, and we've got existing actors that are in legacy education sectors that are very hard to change. Sanjay, can you switch slides? I'm not sure I could do screen share here. Great. So it's not just coronavirus. We've got long-standing job quality problems. We've been increasing inequality, not having economic convergence now it's a festering problem for 15 years. There's an economist, David Otter, who's indicating, as Sanjay opened this discussion, we've got a growing upper middle class and we've got a declining middle class, and then we've had a growing lower end services sector, right? So we've been moving people out of the middle class into this lower end services sector. But coronavirus has hit those sectors: retail, hospitality, restaurants, travel, tourism, source of lower end services jobs. Those are now in trouble. The job openings for a significant period of time are going to be in that growing upper middle class kind of territory. We've got technological advances, especially in IT, that are putting quality jobs that are out of reach for workers who don't get the right skills and training. So Sanjay and I looked at three large sectors, about 30% of US employment, right? And all employment is by sectors. Sectors are all different. You got to understand what's going on in the sectors. Sanjay, next one. We looked at manufacturing. That's been historically a very important middle-class pathway for particularly men without college. But median income is down for men without high school diplomas or without high school diplomas or some college, or with high school diplomas or some college. US manufacturing employment fell by a third in the decade of the 2000s. We've got, as Sanjay noted, the highest labor non-participation rate we've ever had. And coronavirus has hit some sectors, particularly like in aircraft manufacturing. But overall, manufacturing has been fairly stable during the coronavirus period. And we've got aging demographics in manufacturing. So employment fell in the 2000s. It stabilized around the 12 million level. And then now we're going to start opening up manufacturing jobs. If it remains stable, we're going to have at least 2 million manufacturing jobs just due to the aging demographics and retirements. But advanced manufacturing is coming on. It's going to be higher skills. Sanjay, the next one's yours.
muted, sorry. One industry that's been devastated by COVID, obviously, is retail. And retail, the story is an interesting one. The US is overbuilt 6x in retail, or certainly, I don't know if it's overbuilt, but it's 6x more retail per square foot per capita than any European nation, and even 50% more than Canada. And the retail, if you look at the trajectory of retail, this is an industry I know well because of my work in RFID, and I continue to work closely with many retailers. The 2008 crash led to a very interesting situation, which is it was called the first apocalypse of retail. And the follow-up up to that was to, for the workforce to be more about moving things rather than becoming sort of high-end retailers, like you would see at a Brooks Brother or at a Nordstrom or an Apple store. But somehow retail recovered. At the same time, online commerce, Amazon's really started coming into its own. And so by 2011-12, retail was sort of crawling back to some level of health, although many retailers were teetering by that time. But Amazon started taking off and other online retailers started taking off. Meanwhile, 2013-14, robots started entering the retail realm. Now, as online started taking off, more retail moved to the warehouse, more retail jobs. So there's a gender shift from women tend to be more represented in the shops, and men more in warehousing. But also those warehousing jobs may be more transient because those are more automatable. Some of you would have followed the advent of Kiva robots, which was acquired by Amazon. It's an MIT company for about $700 and something million in 2014. So or that and self-driving forklifts. So warehousing is getting more automated. And as I said, Amazon starting off, and then 2020 is a really terrible blow to retail because foot traffic is down, but retailers still have to pay for their inventory and, of course, for real estate. So there's a new model that will hopefully rise from this ashes, if anything at all. There's one model is omni-channeling. So the idea is you buy in the store, you have it delivered home, you buy online, you pick it up in the store, you buy online, you drive by and they put it in your car. Of course, all the drone stuff, that's way off, so I won't hold my breath. But if that happens, the salesperson working at the retail store has to start looking more like an Apple Genius Bar employee than like the invisible person who stocks the shelves. So which means higher skill levels, IT fluency, and product fluency. And so again, another huge education opportunity. Back to you, Bill. Bill, you might be muted.
Healthcare is a third sector that we looked at, growing sector. Aging population is creating higher healthcare demands. There's a suite of new medical technologies that are in turn creating new professions. So this is a big growing sector. Manufacturing has been stable. It's going to grow some. Retail is in difficulty. Healthcare is a rapidly expanding sector. More jobs, but higher skill needs. So new training systems are going to be required. Yet there's all kinds of barriers in that sector. The established health professions really limit entry. Next, Sanjay. And overall, upskilling has been ongoing in the workforce. Jobs are tending to go to the college educated, and the requirement of some college has really replaced high school as a core credential. But is college a default credential? Because what does it stand for, right? It's not necessarily tied to job requirements. We've got growing IT, which is demanding new skills. The result is new high or middle skill jobs are going to require more education beyond high school, but only 1/3 of Americans over age 25 have four-year college degrees. So we're going to need to reach that world, and we're going to need a new workforce education system. Next. So where do we need attention? We've got a very weak labor market information system. Workers don't know what skills they need. Educators don't know what skills to educate for. Employers don't know what skills workers have. There's just not good information in the system about what the needs are for each group that's involved. The transition from school to work is a big problem in the US. They're not connected. Other countries make those connections. We dismantled a lot of vocational education, and our community colleges are underfunded. Their completion rates are much too low overall. Colleges and universities aren't engaged. We don't have a transferable skills certification system in most fields, so it's hard to shift jobs in this country. You can't demonstrate credentials that would get you the next job. And our education and labor programs aren't linked, as we described. And, we don't even have a program for incumbent workers to upskill them, for example. Next slide. So what are the policy implications here? As Sanjay laid out in the beginning, we're going to need new education technologies. That's going to be a scaling mechanism, right? Online, coupled with the new technologies he's described, that's going to be a crucial new piece of building a workforce education system. It's not going to be online alone. It's going to be a blended model, of course, and it's going to require a lot of hands-on. But nonetheless, there's real opportunities to reach the scale we're going to need to get to through these new education technologies. What else are we going to need? We're going to need short courses. Most people can't take 2 years off and go to a community college. They've got to get short, compacted courses that get them the technical skills, but they've got to be stackable so that they can lead to the credentials they're going to need further on. We need programs at community colleges that reach not just community college students. These programs are going to need to reach high school students, and they're going to need to reach incumbent workers that already have jobs that need upskilling. So the role from our community college is going to need to grow. We're starting to experiment with apprenticeships, or what we could call apprenticeship light, kind of youth internship and co-op kind of opportunities to break down this work-learn barrier and give younger people experience in the work world so they can make smarter selections and choices. We need to fix our community college completion rate, and it looks like there's some ways to do that. We need to improve the kind of workforce experience you get at the secondary school level. We're going to need comprehensive or technical high schools. There's an expanded employer role here. Employers are going to have to engage if we're going to break down this work-learn barrier and connect up with education institutions in ways that don't happen yet. We're going to need new curriculum in advanced fields. We're going to need a unifying effort at the state level where states can break down the problems between our education department programs and our labor department programs and connect them, make them work together in tandem. And we're going to need a new labor market information system. So those are some of the policy issues that we highlight in the book. Next slide, Sanjay. This is your wrap up.
Yeah, so what I'll say is that workforce education will be the great societal challenge. I mean, again, our social contract right now with education is not in keeping with the reality. Erik Brynjolfsson has written extensively about how quickly skills are changing, skill requirements are changing, and our social contract is somehow, if you are educated for 4 years, you're going to be educated for the rest of your life. And that's, to me, becoming as laughable as saying to someone, go to the gym for the first, between ages in 18 and 22, and you will be fit for the rest of your life. I mean, we know that's not true. You have to go to the gym, a few times a week to maintain any level of fitness. And the same is true for education as well. And we do not have a system for it. And the result is, in a rapidly changing landscape, we're leaving people behind, just far too many. And too many quality jobs will go unfilled. And that might explain the wage gap as well. And some of the things that we talk about in our book are real and existing examples of, for example, community colleges upskilling people with certificates that are very relevant to local companies. And we just don't have a workforce education system. We need the new GI Bill. And of course, existing institutions will need to make certain reforms. I argue that even Stanford and MIT and Harvard and Berkeley, we need to rethink our roles. But certainly community colleges and technical training centers need to rethink. One thing we didn't talk about extensively is actually, Bill mentioned it, but we didn't spend a lot of time on it, is Votec Schools. Massachusetts has an extensive and excellent Votec school system. MIT actually gets people from these Votec school systems. They're 27. Most states have dismantled them, but it's very important. Exposing younger people to work is very important. That's what the Swiss do. You can be in grades 11 and 12 and you're becoming an accountant, and you might even get significant credit towards your 2-year degree in that sense. And we need to operate at a new scale. And blended is best, but as I've mentioned, I had to explain why. But it builds on a foundation of online. It's better pedagogy regardless. Even regular education ought to go that way. Sal Khan has talked about it for years. And this is the way the world ought to go, and it's better for everyone. So that's what we wanted to say. Erik, back to you, but thank you very much from me and Bill, and a pleasure to do this.
Thank you so much, Sanjay and Bill. That's just fascinating. This is such an important question. Economists look at the value of human capital and put the number in the United States, well over 200 trillion. It's about more than 10 times the GDP and about 4 or 5 times the value of all the physical capital, buildings and structures. So if we can move the dial even just a little bit in improving our human capital, it would have just immense effects. And I'm encouraged by what you're describing, some of the tools with digital education and AI. And we have quite a few questions here. Luckily we have some time to go through them. Let me just pick out a few of them and see how many we can get through. Let me start with Subhasit Ratnam, who asks, can AI-based education do the assessments to find a student's interests and recommendations? And where are we with that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot on it, but I think absolutely. You can imagine, by the way, there's a book by Neil Stephenson called The Diamond Age, if those of you haven't read it. It's a young lady's primer in a diamond age. I think that's the book. It's an interesting read. He's a
whole series.
The whole series. Yeah, he's an incredible writer. So you can imagine a sort of a young lady's primer, right? An AI system that coaches you. We wrote about it, Bill and I, about giving you a sense of what the jobs are. Harrison Keller, who used to be at that time at the University of Texas, Austin, and now is, I think, in the government, created a system called Onramps. So yeah, this is all in the offing. We just need a national effort to take this on, but absolutely, we could do this.
Yeah, I've seen some companies that are trying to do this. Some of them, they ask a set of questions. There's at least a few that have you play video games to try to learn a little bit about like what your aptitudes are. Is MIT using any of these, or you see any of these kinds of tools used to help place people, or can you say, or are companies the ones that are using them more?
Mostly, so the companies are using them a little bit internally with all the attendant issues with bias and so on, as you know, Erik. But there's a company called Head AI, HEAD, Head AI, that's trying to use predictive analytics to figure out where people's skills are. They tend to be a little bit sort of lower level skills, but I think just in terms of what the question is, in terms of looking at young people and looking at inspiring opportunities, where their interests are, where their proclivities are, I haven't seen a lot, but I think this is a place we ought to go. We haven't done it. We do have a new center. Maybe they'll start doing it. So.
Okay. Here's another question. Let me see if I can find it again. Muffy Waterman asks, she agrees with the designing for active learning and for credentials to be credible, separate from trustworthy, assessment needs to be the key. Can you speak to performance-based assessment online? And
that's a fantastic question. And really what you put your finger on is that the assessments we use today, like a quiz, it's a proxy for real world performance. Imagine if, Tom Brady wouldn't have been picked as quarterback for the New England Patriots if we gave him an online quiz and asked him how high he could jump, right? In fact, his performance is based on his ability to bounce back and, recover from an injury and take pressure and recover from a sack. By the way, I should tell you, I got my PhD at UC Berkeley, so I am a 49ers fan. Just Brady comes to mind today. But the point is that I think that what you're talking about is authentic assessments, and things like simulations, things like games, they get more and more authentic. But really, the ultimate authentic simulation is, or assessment is, if you can do it on the job. So internships, that's a form of assessment. Doesn't matter how good your math is. Could you solve the big data problem, right? for a company. So this is a very difficult thing to figure out, but we're on our way. And by the way, this is what surgeons, the places where we, you and I really demand high performance, pilots, surgeons, that's what we do, authentic assessments.
Thanks. So there's an anonymous attendee who asks about the faculty, maybe there's a faculty member, and whether or not faculty are trained to deliver using some of these AI and ML education techniques. Outside of CS and engineering, are there many experts, and is that part of what needs to be done as well?
Well, I have an ironic answer. I actually think that the folks in the humanities get this instinctively. I really do. A lot of the things I described, actually, when you do discussions, Harkness tables, you field study, actually the humanities do a great job. In fact, I feel that engineering and computer science fall into the trap of assuming they have the pen, the student's brain is a sheet of paper, they can just write on and declare victory, And many of the things I've described, and the reason I wrote a book about it is because the book Grasp, that is, are not widely known amongst faculty. At all, actually. But the good teachers know it instinctively. And, as I said, parents and kids know it as well, right?
Well, that's a really interesting point. Let me dive a little deeper into the differences in the teaching styles, but also the content. I mean, sometimes people make this distinction between hard skills and soft skills and learning specific, like learning how to do Python versus learning how to think logically or how to persuade somebody. And the story goes that the hard skills are easier to get someone to learn in an online environment, but they're not as lasting that 10 or 20 years later, maybe Python isn't the language that everyone needs to know, but the softer skills are more set people up for success longer term, but are harder to convey in that kind of environment. Could you speak to that story that I've heard many times and whether it rings true from your experiences, and if so, or if not, what are some of the implications?
Yeah, I'd like to actually build as well, talk about this, because in some of the programs we studied, there's an element of that. For example, if you look at retail, it's the soft skills as much as the hard skills. It's one thing to say you need, a 2 terabyte flash hard drive. It's another thing to sort of explain why you need it. Yeah, we call it, we've shied away from calling it soft skills because actually, in my view, they're really hard skills. And so we started calling them human skills. And you're exactly right. We might fall into the trap of just doing the Python programming or, ML, which have a shorter shelf life, but it's these human skills or soft skills that have a longer utility to the human being. And one of the things I don't want to do here is in some way convey, in fact, quite the opposite. In fact, Bill has many years ago suggested that we'd be very careful about this, that we can denude or sort of take the complete holistic college education, replace it with this. We can't, because it's all the stuff that happens in the human skills side, which is both difficult and high demand, and we will lose first and pay the penalty later. Bill, can you just speak to that? Because you led me down that path many years ago.
Yeah, in other words, it's not as if we need to eliminate the liberal arts, right? But there's really important stuff that we need and we get from that side. It's that we need to supplement this with opening career pathways as well. So we're going to have to do two things, not just one, I think is the key here. And what Sanjay said is, it reminds me of something that I've been watching a little bit. Both he and I are familiar with advanced manufacturing issues. There's a real historic divide in any kind of factory workplace in the US, right? There's an engineering cadre, right, that learns design and doesn't have the depth of hands-on experience. And then there are a workforce that are trained for individual and particular machines, like a CNC piece of equipment or welding or particular manufacturing skills. They're tied to their machines. So you've got a high-end engineering cadre that doesn't have the hands-on background. And then you've got hands-on, but in a highly specialized kind of way. And we've created this big gap between these two worlds. And one of the things that we're thinking about is, how could you create a new category of technologist, right, in between the engineer and the technician that has some of these employers often call them critical thinking skills. In other words, the ability to really do troubleshooting. In other words, not just run the machine, but understand how the whole factory floor system is operating. What are the processes? What are the supply chains? What are the systems that are going into operating that factory? We need people that understand those systems as well as understanding the hands-on, right? To occupy for advanced manufacturing, that middle territory is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to get there. We can't have worker automatons tied to individual machines. We're going to need a workforce that has a much broader understanding of what's going on in the factory and how to operate within it, and a hands-on base, not just an engineering design base. So these are the kinds of skilled issues that we're going to need to have to start thinking about and really designing new programs that merge these things like critical thinking and troubleshooting and problem solving kind of skill base with the hands-on piece to develop these new kind of systems understandings.
Great. So we have a little less than 10 minutes left and we have over 20 questions. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but I'm going to try and ask you a number of them relatively rapid fire and see if you can answer them relatively rapidly so we get as many people engaged as possible. Let me go to Sebastian Steffen. He's a PhD student. He's asked that he points out that he's found evidence of many of the points you've made by analyzing specific industries through job postings. He's looked at over 200 million.
Eric, I've lost your audio.
Okay.
I could hear him, Bill. I think it's you.
Okay. So good. At least one of you can. So we found. So he found evidence through these couple 100 million job postings of this kinds of skill demands. But he'd like your thoughts on how we can direct these insights towards designing courses. That is, looking at the skill demand, say from hundreds of millions of job postings, and matching that to how we can teach skills better.
Yeah, it depends on what level. It's actually not a trivial question. I mean, I'd also say that the other extreme is we take all our courses and we react to skills demands. The thing about that extreme is we might end up training a student for the first job, but not for life. So we need to really balance, on the one hand, being responsive with putting these skills in, and then the faculty have to know how to teach those skills, etc. So I don't have a quick answer for you. That's actually very difficult to do, but we need to find the balance and figure out how to do it.
Like I don't know if it's automated, but a process where there's sort of testing what the employers are asking for and then matching it to the kinds of things that are being taught.
Yeah, I think what we need is a sort of a finishing school element that automatically generates some of this. Sorry, Bill, you were going to say something.
This is part of a deep problem. We don't have a good labor market information system. Any efficient market, in the end, has got to be an information system where the participants in a system get information about each other and therefore can operate at a higher level as a result, right? We don't have a good labor market information system. It is a broken market. And precisely the kind of issues that the questioner raised are, built into our system. It leaves employers uninformed about the kind of workers that are applying to them. It leaves workers uninformed about what the employer needs are. And then the educators don't know what to educate for. So fixing this labor market information system, and the question is an example of an element that needs to be considered. This is really key to building what we need to get to.
Okay. Well, building on that, let me bundle three questions together that relate to it. One is, which governments are doing a better job in this workforce education and matching? The second one is, what are the responsibilities of companies, business, and the public sector as they try to manage the employee towards these areas? And the third one is, Russ Siegelman, can you elaborate on the labor force information system problem we just described? What kind of data is available and why isn't it as distributed and easy to come? So maybe you can connect those questions a little bit to
Bill?
I'll do governments. Look, European governments have broken down the work-learn barriers, and they have much more connected systems, and they, are able to create really quality opportunities for a lot of people in those countries. So, very strong apprenticeship program countries like Germany, Switzerland, Austria present a new kind of system that we need. Their systems are not going to fit ours. They're very different kinds of countries, but we need to think about how to break down this work-learn barrier. But there are many examples in the US of states that are doing very creative things. And we look closely at the state of South Carolina. which has a statewide apprenticeship program, right? Including a very innovative new youth apprenticeship program that starts in the junior year of high school, that takes high school students out of what can often be a disruptive high school environment and puts them into community college and work experience along with high school, that just puts them into a very different and frankly more mature and healthier culture, because they're working with older people on assigned tasks. So, I mean, a state like Ohio has figured out how to bring its community college system together with its employers and then create a network of amongst its community colleges to develop new programs and share them with each other, right? So that you begin to develop a system at the community college level in the state.
I think
So
I'll just
there's
add
a lot
that,
of state examples like that. Sanjay?
yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add that things like Instagram marketing, right? It's a job category that didn't exist even a few years ago, right? Why is it, to the earlier question you asked, Erik, you could have a little module on Instagram marketing, so at least students know what the hell it is if they're doing marketing, traditional marketing, right? It's that gap, it's that last mile where we're falling short, perhaps even the last 10 miles.
Maybe some of the principles they've learned in the generic marketing could then be tweaked to make it more customized.
Exactly.
Or the coding, of course. There are several questions about credentials and names. Let me just see if I can. People point out that MIT has a lot of name recognition and other names, school students. Others mentioned the Ivy League schools. So how does all this relate to that? In particular, one person points out that Ivy League schools have very restrictive admissions, and so does MIT and Stanford. What are the opportunities and issues brought up by broadening access and also moving beyond the credentials of these schools towards maybe connecting it to specific things that are learned?
I'll tell you the example of the MicroMasters. It's something we invented. Yossi Sheffi and I had invented MIT. Basically, what we did was it's half a master's. If you finish it, you get this new credential we made up called the MicroMasters. It's an MITx MicroMasters. And if you finish it and do well, you can apply to MIT. If you get in, then you can finish in half the time at half the cost, right? We launched it. And by the way, there's no admissions to the MicroMasters. It's like playing golf. You're playing against yourself, right? There's no admissions. You just have to finish it. It's difficult. There are proctored exams. MIT now has almost 1 million people enrolled, all right? Wow. We launched it, and now there are more than 50 MicroMasters from 25 universities on 5 continents. I'm sorry? It's freemium. It's freemium. So the content is free. You pay for the certificate. The certificate's very affordable, like a couple $100, right? Wow. Per. So, and you take 4 and you get it, for $1,000, you're getting half your master's. Now, because MIT did it, and because we're going to give credit to students who get admitted based on that, it's created a sort of an exchange system. And now there are companies accepting it. So this is what I mean by the social contract of universities. We need to get out of our bubbles, get out there and start inventing it. Erik, Raphael Reif and the MIT, the president of MIT and the MIT Corporation and the MIT faculty, we all had to go through the struggles, and MIT said, we'll just do it. Damn it. I don't think they said damn it, but close enough.
Well, that's true. MIT has been a big pioneer in all of this. I remember being in some of the faculty meetings where this was discussed, and certainly you've played a big role in that. There's also a lot of private companies getting into it and other universities. Can you say a little bit about the landscape and how you see this shaking out? Do you think that the same schools, the incumbents that have been successful for the past 100 or 200 years in higher education are positioned to continue to be the leaders going forward, or is there going to be a disruption, a la Clay Christensen, where the whole higher education model is substantially disrupted and new entrants gain?
I think there is going to be a disruption. The problem with some of the corporate certificates is, as I said, they prepare you for a job, not for life. But I do think that universities that don't participate in this disruption will be disrupted themselves. But I also think it's a mission thing. I think it's a responsibility, and we cannot sit outside and watch it play out.
Let me ask you a concrete version of the question. Do you think that we're going to have thousands of introductory biology teachers teaching that course in classrooms across the country, or will there be a high production value version of it that most people take?
I think there'll be a dominant design. I think there'll be 3 or 4 fantastic biology courses, depending on flavors, language, things like that. A few, but I think that the coaching and that's where the secret sauce will be in the future.
And Eric Lander is exceptionally charismatic as well as genius level IQ. But Is the right model to think of a professor leading that, or should it be Tom Cruise and some guys from Hollywood producing it?
We've thought about it. We have found it difficult to replicate the passion and the knowledge of the actual faculty member without a tremendous amount of preparation. And we do, 1 in 5 faculty members, you, Erik, you could pull it off. I think the vast majority are pretty good, but then to get Tom Cruise to do it, that's a whole other shebang. We thought about it, trust me.
But
All right.
Erik, remember too that, there's the online piece, but then you rescue the classroom from the lecture. And that's where the face-to-face mentoring, the face-to-face connectivity, the kind of personalization of education can occur, right? So it's not as if those teachers disappear. If anything, their role becomes more important.
Well, really good point. I really appreciate it. There's so much more we could talk about, but I regret we are out of time. This will be on video, so people who want to go back and listen more carefully to it. And let me tell everybody that please that we're having another session in 2 weeks. Erik Brynjolfsson, who used to be at the BEA, is going to be speaking about modernizing measurement and of productivity using non-standard data. So please join us in a couple of weeks for that. Thanks again, Sanjay and Bill. This was just absolutely fascinating, and I appreciate all the work you're doing in this area.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.